Hi, my name is Mackenzie, and today we'll be talking about a functional analysis and the different phases that are conducted throughout that procedure. First, we'll talk about what a functional analysis is, and then we'll talk more in depth about the different phases throughout. And at the end, we will talk about some disadvantages and advantages to this procedure. So, what is a functional analysis? The original framework was developed by Iwata and his colleagues, and a functional analysis is a procedure that manipulates the antecedent and consequences to resemble the client's natural environment. Many times, this assessment is referred to as analog due to its systematic nature. Unfortunately, many times we can only resemble the client's natural environment, and these procedures cannot be seamlessly implemented into the client's everyday daily routines. However, these manipulations do allow analysts to observe changes in the targeted behaviors based on their predicted functions and helps identify future functions of behavior for future treatment plans. And it is very important to note that although many regard Iwata and his colleagues as the first to use the term functional analysis, B.F. Skinner is reported using the term back in 1948. Moving on to our first phase here, the purpose of our play/control phase is to establish baseline data. Baseline data is incredibly important because without baseline data, we will not be able to demonstrate a functional relationship with any of our other phases. Problem behavior is expected to be a lot lower during this phase due to unrestricted access to reinforcement, and the conditions of this phase are unrestricted access to preferred items and activities, as well as social praise and attention, and no demands are placed at this time. We do try to ignore problem behavior as best as possible. However, it is okay to intervene for safety. The way we do this is we neutrally redirect using neutral tones, a neutral facial expression, and attempt to ignore as much as possible. Moving on to our alone/ignore phase, the purpose of this phase is to identify if a behavior has an automatic function. The way that we do this is the client does have unrestricted access to tangible reinforcers. However, that client is left completely alone in the room. There's no supervisor present to deliver consequences for behavior. If the client, however, cannot be left alone, staff will respond to behavior with a neutral facial expression and only intervene when necessary with neutral prompting for safety, similar to the previous slide. If the behavior does persist without demands, consequences, or attention, it can be inferred that the function of the behavior would be automatic. Moving on to our attention phase. So the purpose of this phase is to identify if a behavior is maintained by attention. The way that this works is each participant, whenever they engage in the targeted behavior, the instructor or supervisor will then respond with a positive or negative comment. That positive comment could come in the form of a pleasant neutral comment such as be careful, or a reprimand such as no, stop, don't do that. If the behavior continues to persist in the presence of reprimands and or pleasant comments, it could be inferred that the function is attention. Moving on to our demand/escape phase. So the purpose of this phase is to identify if a behavior is maintained by an escape function. Now, this phase is a lot more systematic in implementation than the previous phases, and it has a 3-step prompting method. So first, we'll use an example of doing a puzzle. I'll give the instruction, do the puzzle, and then I'll model the desired behavior of putting 3 pieces in a puzzle. From there, I will prompt as necessary for that participant to complete that task. Now, this demand does not end until the task is either removed or until prompting is no longer appropriate for the completion of the task, or if prompting causes further escalation. So, if the behavior does persist in the presence of non-preferred activities or demands when they are placed, it can be inferred that it is an escape function. And finally, our last phase, our tangible phase. So the purpose of this phase is to identify if a behavior is maintained by a tangible function. The way we do this is we allow access to a reinforcing activity or item for a designated amount of time before removing that reinforcer and or activity. We then record at what rate or if the behavior occurs at all. And then it is also important to note that although we are taking away access to a reinforcer, that does not mean that there is no access to reinforcers in that environment at all. If the behavior continues to increase or occurs at a steady rate, it can be inferred that there is a tangible function. And finally, the disadvantages. So there could be an increase in an undesirable behavior to an unsafe level, and it may obtain a new function due to constant reinforcement, such as the attention phase. Manipulations of variables can also impact progression, and it can only be run if all resources are available, such as time, money, experts, and willing participants. And then a lot of times, contrived functional analyses don't give a clear picture of the behavior in the natural environment due to the struggle to implement. Thank you.